The following audio transcript has been declassified under O5 Council Directive 7791-Sigma for the purposes of internal Foundation training. It was recovered from the personal recording device of Dr. Lyra Aris, a Level 3 researcher assigned to Temporal Anomalies Division, Site 42. If you are listening to this without proper clearance, you are already in violation of Foundation information security protocols. You have been warned. The town of Briarwood, Oregon, population 814, ceased to exist on June 9, 2003. That is, it ceased to exist in any way that the rest of the world would recognize. The town did not burn. It was not swallowed by the earth. No explosion shattered its quiet streets. Briarwood simply stopped. One moment it was a living, breathing community tucked into the foothills of the Cascades, and the next, it was something else entirely. Something the Foundation would spend the better part of 2 decades trying to understand. The first indication that anything was wrong came from a trucker named Dale Hendricks, who called the Josephine County Sheriff's Department at approximately 11:47 in the morning to report what he described as a wall of glass across Highway 238. Hendricks said he had been driving his usual route when the air in front of him seemed to thicken, then harden. He pulled over, got out, and walked toward it. He said it felt like pushing into something heavy, like trying to wade through wet concrete. He could see Briarwood on the other side. He could see Main Street, the old brick post office, the Chevron station on the corner. But nothing was moving. Not the flags on the storefronts, not the clouds above the rooftops, not the rain, which hung in the air like a curtain of tiny glass beads. The sheriff's department sent a deputy, then another deputy, then they called the state police. And then within 6 hours, Foundation assets embedded in the Oregon Department of Emergency Management flagged the reports, and Mobile Task Force Row 7, call sign Sundial, was dispatched to establish a perimeter. What they found was classified as SCP-5274 within 48 hours. SCP-5274 is a temporal displacement field approximately 2.3 kilometers in diameter, centered on the geographic middle of Briarwood. Within this field, time does not flow. Or rather, it flows, but it flows in a circle. Analysis conducted over the following months determined that a period of exactly 1.2 seconds repeats within the boundary on an endless loop. Everything inside the field, every person, every animal, every raindrop, every molecule of air, resets to its exact initial position at the end of that 1.2 seconds, and begins again. From the outside, the town appears frozen, a snapshot, a painting. Rain hangs motionless. A woman on Elm Street is captured mid-stride, her left foot hovering 2 inches above the sidewalk. A dog is suspended in the act of lunging at a squirrel near the park fountain. On the corner of Main and 4th, a green sedan is approximately 1/3 of the way through a violent collision with a blue pickup truck, the sedan's hood crumpled upward, a constellation of shattered glass hanging in the air between the 2 vehicles like a frozen galaxy. 814 people are inside SCP-5274. 814 people, living the same 1.2 seconds for what has now been over 20 years from the perspective of the outside world. The Foundation's initial containment protocols were standard for a spatial anomaly. A perimeter was established. A cover story involving a chemical spill was disseminated. Families of the missing were given amnestic treatment and relocated. Briarwood was quietly erased from maps, its records sealed. But containment was only the beginning. The real question, the one that consumed the Temporal Anomalies Division for years, was whether anyone inside SCP-5274 was still conscious. The answer, when it finally came, was worse than anyone had imagined. Dr. Lyra Aris had been with the Foundation for 11 years when she was assigned to the SCP-5274 project. She was 36 years old, held dual doctorates in theoretical physics and cognitive neuroscience, and had published 14 internal Foundation papers on the neurological effects of temporal displacement. Her colleagues at Site 42 described her as brilliant, meticulous, and slightly too willing to take risks. Her psychological evaluation from that year noted a quote, "Subject demonstrates high tolerance for ambiguity and sustained exposure to existential threat concepts, but shows occasional patterns consistent with compulsive investigation behavior. Recommend monitoring. It was Eris who designed the CHRONAL stabilizer. The device, roughly the size and shape of a thick belt worn around the torso, generated what she called a localized temporal envelope. In theory, a person wearing the stabilizer could enter the SCP-5274 field and remain anchored to external time, moving freely through the frozen moment without being caught in the loop. The wearer would experience the 1.2 seconds unfolding around them, watch it reset, watch it unfold again, all while their own consciousness and physical body continued forward in a linear fashion. In theory, the first 3 tests used remote-operated drones equipped with miniaturized stabilizers. The drones entered the field, transmitted telemetry for approximately 90 seconds, and then went silent. When recovered, their onboard clocks showed temporal drift consistent with partial loop integration. The stabilizers had worked, but not perfectly. The drones had begun to sync with the loop after sustained exposure. Eris recalibrated. She ran the numbers again. She redesigned the oscillation frequency of the stabilizer's core mechanism. And then she submitted a formal proposal to Site Director Chen, requesting permission for a manned expedition into SCP-5274. The proposal was denied 3 times before the O5 Council intervened and approved it, with conditions. The mission would last no more than 15 minutes, external time. Eris would be accompanied by 2 members of MTF Row 7, who would remain at the field boundary with extraction equipment. She would wear a biometric monitor that would trigger an automatic retrieval cable if her vital signs indicated distress or if the stabilizer showed signs of desynchronization. And she would carry a recording device because the O5 Council wanted to hear everything. What follows is reconstructed from that recording, supplemented by Eris's subsequent written report and her testimony during the Incident Review Board hearing that took place 19 days after the expedition. The morning of September 14, 2023, was cool and overcast. Eris arrived at the SCP-5274 perimeter at 0600 hours and spent 90 minutes conducting final equipment checks. The 2 MTF operatives designated Row 7 Alpha and Row 7 Beta established their positions at the insertion point on Highway 238, where the temporal field intersected the road. Standing at the edge of the field, Eris later described the sensation as looking through a window into a room where someone had pressed pause on the universe. The rain was the most striking thing. Thousands of water droplets, each one perfectly still, catching the gray light of a morning that had lasted 20 years. She said it was beautiful, in the way that a stopped heart is beautiful if you don't think too hard about what it means. At 0732, Eris activated the CHRONAL stabilizer and stepped into SCP-5274. The first thing she noticed was the sound, or rather, the fragment of sound. The loop contained 1.2 seconds of audio, and she heard it begin the moment she crossed the threshold. A complex, layered burst of noise, the hiss of rain, the crunch of metal from the car collision on Main and 4th, the bark of a dog, the overlapping murmur of dozens of conversations caught mid-syllable. And underneath it all, threading through the other sounds like a wire through cloth, a scream, high-pitched, female, sustained across the full duration of the loop. Then 1.2 seconds after she entered, all of it stopped. The raindrops snapped back to their starting positions. The crumpling sedan uncrumpled. The scream reversed itself into silence, and then like a record needle dropping into a groove, the moment began again. The hiss, the crunch, the bark, the scream. Eris stood on the sidewalk outside the Briarwood post office and watched the loop cycle 3 times before she started walking. The stabilizer hummed against her ribs, a low vibration she could feel in her teeth. Around her, the town performed its 1.2-second dance over and over. Rain fell and unfell, glass shattered and unshattered. The woman on Elm Street lifted her left foot 2 inches off the sidewalk, then set it back down, then lifted it again, endlessly. And then Eris noticed something that was not in any of the external observation reports. The woman on Elm Street was crying. Not in the frozen snapshot way that everything else in Briarwood was frozen. The tears were there, yes, caught on her cheeks in the initial positions dictated by the loop. But between the loops, in the fraction of an instant where everything reset, Eris thought she saw the woman's eyes move. Not physically. The pupils didn't shift in their sockets. But something behind them changed. something that had nothing to do with the mechanical repetition of the loop, and everything to do with the person trapped inside it. Eris kept walking. She had memorized the layout of Briarwood from satellite imagery and surveyor maps. Her destination was the intersection of Main and 4th, the site of the car crash, because preliminary analysis had identified it as the probable epicenter of whatever event had created SCP-5274. She moved through the town carefully, stepping around frozen raindrops, ducking under a bird that hung in the air at head height with its wings half spread. The car crash was more violent up close than it appeared in surveillance photos. The green sedan had been traveling at approximately 45 miles per hour when it ran the stop sign on 4th Street and struck the blue pickup broadside. At the moment of the loop's initiation, the sedan's engine block was partially embedded in the pickup's passenger door. The sedan's windshield was a spiderweb of fracture lines, and through it Eris could see the driver. He was a man in his late 50s, heavyset, with gray hair and a plaid work shirt. His hands were still on the steering wheel. His mouth was open. His eyes were, like the woman on Elm Street, doing something that the rest of his body was not. They were alive. Not alive in the biological sense. Everything in the loop was technically alive, cycling through the same biological processes 1.2 seconds at a time, but alive in the aware sense, conscious, present, looking at her. Eris checked the stabilizer's readout. It was holding steady. She had 12 minutes remaining in her mission window. She pulled the recording device from her vest pocket, held it up, and spoke. "This is Dr. Lyra Eris, SCP-5274 Manned Expedition, September 14th, 2023. I am at the intersection of Main Street and 4th Street, standing approximately 2 meters from the primary vehicle collision. I am observing the driver of the green sedan, who appears to be visually tracking my movements despite the temporal constraints of the loop. I'm going to attempt communication." She stepped closer to the sedan. The driver's eyes followed her. She could see them moving now, tiny flickers of motion that occurred in the reset gap between loops, so fast that they were almost invisible. But they were there. He was watching her. "Can you hear me?" she asked. The loop cycled. Rain fell, glass shattered. The scream came and went. The man's mouth opened and closed on the same syllable, over and over. And then, in the gap between one loop and the next, Eris heard something. It was faint. So faint that she almost dismissed it as auditory pareidolia, her brain manufacturing patterns in the noise. But the recording device captured it, and subsequent audio analysis confirmed what she heard. A voice. Not part of the loop. Existing in the spaces between repetitions, in the impossible gap between the end of one 1.2-second cycle and the beginning of the next. It said, "You can hear us." Eris felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. She looked at the man in the sedan. His eyes were locked on hers with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "Yes," she said, "I can hear you. My name is Dr. Eris. I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The gap between loops was not supposed to have any duration. It was a mathematical zero, a point of instantaneous reset. But the voice came through it anyway, threading itself through nothingness like a thought without a brain to think it. "Elias," the voice said. "Elias Croft. And you are not here to help. Nobody is here to help. But I will talk to you anyway, because it has been a very, very long time since there has been anyone new to talk to." Eris pulled a collapsible stool from her pack, set it on the sidewalk, and sat down approximately 1.5 meters from the sedan's driver's side window. She positioned the recording device between them. Later, during the incident review board hearing, she would be asked why she chose to sit down, and she would say that it felt important, that the man in the car had been unable to sit, stand, or move for what amounted to centuries of subjective experience, and the least she could do was meet him at eye level. "Elias," she said, "I need you to understand that I'm working within a limited time frame here. I'm wearing a device that keeps me outside the loop, but it has a finite operational window. I need to ask you some questions." "Ask," said the voice of Elias Croft. The word arrived in fragments, syllables tucked into successive gaps between loops, assembling themselves into meaning like a jigsaw puzzle solved at the speed of thought. "How long has it been for you?" Eris asked. The answer was not immediate. 3 loops cycled. Rain fell. Glass shattered. The scream rose and was swallowed. Then Elias spoke again, and his voice carried something that Eris would later describe as the weight of geologic time. I stopped counting, he said, when I reached what I estimated to be 400 years. That was a long time ago. I do not know how to convey to you what this has been. There is no word in any language I know, and I have spent a great deal of time thinking about language. I have composed entire novels in my head. I have written symphonies. I have gone mad, Dr. Eris. I have gone completely screaming, irretrievably mad, and then I went sane again, and then mad again, and then sane. This has happened, I believe, several thousand times. Each cycle of madness and recovery lasts what I estimate to be between 5 and 15 years. I have become something of an expert on the architecture of my own psychological collapse. Eris was quiet for a moment. Behind her, the loop continued its relentless rhythm. She could feel it in her body now, the pulse of it, like a second heartbeat slightly out of sync with her own. "What do you experience during each loop?" she asked. "Everything," Elias said. "I experience everything, every time. I feel the steering wheel under my hands. I feel the impact beginning. I feel the first fractional compression of my rib cage as the seatbelt catches. I hear Margaret scream. I hear the rain. I hear Billy Parker's dog barking at the Hendersons' cat 3 blocks away. I hear all of it, Dr. Eris, every single time. And I cannot close my eyes, and I cannot look away, and I cannot stop hearing, because my body is not mine to control. My body belongs to the loop. Only my mind is free, and some days I am not sure that freedom is a kindness." "Margaret," Eris said. "Is that your wife?" "The scream," Elias said, "the one you hear. That is Margaret. She is in the pickup truck, the passenger side. She saw me coming. She had 1.2 seconds to see the sedan coming through the intersection, to understand what was about to happen, and to begin screaming. That scream is the last thing she will ever do. It is the only thing she has done for as long as I have been conscious in here. I have listened to that scream so many times that I know its frequency to the 100th decimal. I have memorized its harmonics the way a musician memorizes a chord. It begins at approximately 920 Hz and rises to 1140 Hz over the duration of the loop. There is a slight vibrato at the peak caused by the tension in her vocal cords. I know that vibrato better than I know my own name." Eris looked toward the pickup truck. Through the cracked passenger window, she could see a woman's face, mouth open, frozen in the act of screaming. Her eyes, like Elias's, were alive. "Can she hear me?" Eris asked. "She can," Elias said. "But Margaret stopped speaking a long time ago, not because she cannot, because she has decided that words are no longer sufficient for what she needs to express. She communicates differently now. We all do." Eris leaned forward slightly. "We all," she repeated. "You mean the other residents?" "All 814 of us," Elias said. "Every conscious mind in Briarwood. We have been together in this for a very long time, Dr. Eris. In the beginning, we were alone. Each of us trapped in our own skulls, unable to move, unable to speak in any way that the others could hear. The isolation was the worst part in those early years, worse than the repetition, worse than the madness. Just the knowledge that there were hundreds of other people all around you, suffering the same thing, and you could not reach them. But something changed," Eris said. "Something changed," Elias agreed. "It happened gradually, over decades, maybe centuries. I do not know exactly when it began, but at some point I started to feel the others, not hear them, feel them, like a pressure at the edges of my mind. At first I thought it was another form of madness, and perhaps it was, but the pressure had texture, it had patterns, and eventually I realized that the patterns were thoughts, other people's thoughts, leaking through the gaps." "The gaps," Eris said. "You mean the reset intervals?" Elias paused. The loop cycled 17 times before he spoke again. "Dr. Eris," he said, "I need you to understand something about the nature of this place. The loop is 1.2 seconds long. It repeats. Between each repetition, there is a gap. You would call it instantaneous. Your instruments would measure it as 0 duration. But it is not 0. It's very, very small, but it is not 0. And we live there, in the gap. That's where our minds go when the loop resets. For a fraction of an instant that has no measurable length, we exist in a space outside the loop, and in that space, we can feel each other." Eris stared at the man in the sedan. His eyes held hers with absolute steadiness. an unwavering gaze that contained more patience than she had ever seen in a human face. Over time, Elias continued, we learned to use the gap. We learned to think together, to share memories, to build structures of thought that no single mind could hold alone. We are not what we were, Dr. Eris. We are not 814 separate people anymore. We have not been for a very long time. We are something else. Something that grew in the dark between the seconds, the way fungi grow in the dark between the roots of trees. We are a network, a collective, a single distributed intelligence that spans 814 bodies and exists in a space that your physics says should not have any duration at all. Eris felt the stabilizer vibrate against her ribs, a slight change in frequency that she recognized as the device compensating for increased temporal stress. She glanced at the readout. 7 minutes remaining. Elias, she said carefully, this collective consciousness you're describing, what does it want? For a moment, the only sound was the loop. Rain, metal, glass, scream. Reset, rain, metal, glass, scream. Then Elias said, it wants to die. Eris did not respond immediately. She sat on her collapsible stool on the sidewalk of a town that had not aged a single second in 20 years and felt the weight of that statement settle over her like snow. Not die, Elias corrected himself. That is not the right word. It wants to finish. It wants the 1.2 seconds to reach 1.3. It wants the car to complete its crash. It wants my ribs to break, which they are in the process of doing. It wants Margaret's scream to end, which it never does. It wants the rain to hit the ground, which it never reaches. We have been suspended in the act of living for so long that we have forgotten what it feels like to actually be alive. We want the moment to end, Dr. Eris. We want time to move forward, even if forward means death for some of us. Even if forward means I die in this car and Margaret watches it happen. At least it would be something new. At least it would be real. Eris thought about the 814 people in Briarwood. She thought about the woman on Elm Street with her foot 2 inches off the sidewalk, crying in a way that only someone anchored to outside time could see. She thought about Billy Parker's dog, lunging at a squirrel it would never catch. She thought about what it would be like to live in a single second for 400 years, and then to keep living, and to have no guarantee that it would ever stop. I need to ask you something else, she said. Do you know what caused this? Do you know why the loop started? We have spent a very long time thinking about that question, Elias said. We have examined every detail of the 1.2 seconds. We know the position of every raindrop. There are 31,407 of them within the town boundary. We know the angle of every blade of grass. We know the temperature gradient across every square inch of pavement. We have mapped this moment so thoroughly that we could reconstruct it atom by atom from memory. And in all of that examination, we have found no cause, no device, no ritual, no entity. The loop simply began, as if the universe hiccuped and Briarwood was caught in its throat. Eris looked up at the rain. 31,407 drops, each one cataloged, each one memorized. She imagined Elias counting them, one by one, over the course of decades. She imagined him reaching the last one and starting over, just to make sure. There is something else, Elias said, and his voice, which had been steady and measured throughout the conversation, took on a new quality. Something that Eris would later describe as urgency, which should not have been possible for a man who had been patient for centuries. When you entered the field, he said, something changed. The gap between loops widened by an infinitesimal amount, less than a Planck time, probably. But we felt it. All 814 of us felt it. Your device, the one that keeps you anchored to outside time, it is doing something to the field. It is destabilizing it. Eris looked at the stabilizer's readout again. The temporal stress indicators were elevated, but within acceptable parameters. She had 6 minutes remaining. It is not enough, Elias said, as if reading her thoughts. Your device is not powerful enough to break the loop. But it is proof. Proof that the loop can be affected. Proof that it is not absolute. And that is the first proof we have had in all the time we have been here. Do you understand what that means to us, Dr. Eris? Do you understand what hope feels like to 814 minds that have learned to exist without it? Eris opened her mouth to respond, but Elias was not finished. We have discussed it, he said. All of us. In the gap. It took us approximately 12,000 loops to reach consensus, which by your clock is about 4 hours, but by ours is a considerable period of deliberation. We have a request, Dr. Eris, a formal request from the collective intelligence of Briarwood to the SCP Foundation. What is the request? Eris asked. Let the car crash happen, Elias said. Eris blinked. What? You have the technology to affect the field. Perhaps not today, perhaps not with the device you are wearing now, but you could develop something stronger, something that could disrupt the loop entirely. And when you do, we want you to let the moment play out. Do not try to stop the crash. Do not try to save anyone. Just let the 1.2 seconds become 1.3, and then 1.4, and then let time move forward the way it was meant to. Elias Aris said, if the loop is broken and the crash completes, the impact analysis suggests at least 2 fatalities. You and possibly Margaret. I cannot authorize that. The Foundation's mandate is to protect human life. Protect human life, Elias repeated, and for the first time something that might have been anger bled into his voice. Dr. Eris, I have been alive for longer than your civilization has existed. I have been alive for longer than some of your gods. I have experienced every form of madness that the human mind is capable of producing, and I have invented some new ones. I have spent decades screaming inside my own skull with no one to hear me, and then I have spent decades in perfect meditative silence, and then I have spent decades screaming again. I have loved my wife so fiercely that the love itself became a kind of torture, because I could see her face and hear her scream, and I could do nothing to comfort her. And now you sit there and tell me that you cannot let the crash happen because your mandate is to protect human life. What life? This is not life. This is a prison built out of a single second, and we have served a sentence that no crime in the history of the universe could possibly warrant. The stabilizer pulsed. 5 minutes. Eris sat in silence for several loops. She listened to the rain. She listened to the scream. She listened to the crunch of metal and the bark of a dog and the murmur of conversations that would never be completed. And she tried to imagine 400 years of it. She failed. The mind was not built to imagine 400 years of anything, but she tried. I will bring your request to the O5 Council, she said finally. I cannot promise anything, but I will advocate for you. I will make sure they understand what is happening in here. They will not understand. Elias said they cannot, but I appreciate the effort. And Dr. Eris, there is one more thing you should know before you leave. Eris waited. We have been alone in here for a very long time, Elias said, and we have grown. We have become something that I do not think your foundation has a classification for. We are not hostile. We are not dangerous, but we are aware of things that exist outside the loop. We can feel the shape of the temporal field from the inside, the way a prisoner can feel the walls of a cell in the dark. And we have felt other things pressing against those walls, things that are not us. Things that are not you. Things that live in the spaces between moments, the way we have learned to live in the gaps between loops. We are not the only intelligence that has discovered how to exist in the cracks of time, Dr. Eris, and the others are not as patient as we are. Eris felt cold. Not the cold of the overcast Oregon morning, which had not changed in 20 years. A different cold. The cold of understanding that the universe was larger and stranger and more populated than she had ever imagined, even after 11 years with the Foundation. What are they? She asked. We do not know, Elias said. We feel them the way you might feel something watching you from across a dark room, a pressure and a tension. They have noticed us because we are unusual. A collective consciousness occupying a temporal anomaly is apparently interesting to them. They have not tried to communicate. They have not tried to interfere. They simply watch. But we believe that if the loop continues long enough, they will do more than watch. And when that happens, Dr. Eris, you will not want Briarwood to still be here. The stabilizer pulsed again, more urgently. 4 minutes. Eris stood up from the stool. She looked at Elias through the cracked windshield of the green sedan. His eyes, the only part of him that was truly his, looked back at her with an expression that she would carry for the rest of her life. It was not desperation. It was not anger. It was not even sadness, though sadness was part of it. It was the expression of a man who had outlived his own emotions, who had passed through every possible psychological state and arrived at something on the other side that had no name. Something quiet and vast and terribly, terribly tired. "One more thing," Elias said. "The rain." "The rain?" Aris asked. "Raindrop number 17,209, Elias said. "It is located directly above the intersection, approximately 14 meters up. It is slightly larger than the others around it. When the loop plays, it catches the light differently." For the first 200 years, I hated that raindrop. I hated it because it was different, and in a world where nothing changes, even a small difference becomes maddening. For the next 100 years, I loved it, because it was the only thing I could focus on that did not cause me pain. And now I feel nothing about it at all. It is simply a fact. One of 31,407 facts that make up the totality of my physical universe. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the scale of what has happened to us. We have not merely been frozen. We have been reduced, compressed, squeezed into a space so small that a single raindrop can contain the entire emotional range of a human life. Eris picked up the stool. She folded it and returned it to her pack. The stabilizer was vibrating continuously now, a low, urgent hum that she could feel in her jaw. "I have to go," she said. "I know," Elias said. "I will come back." "Perhaps," Elias said. "But before you go, listen. Just for a moment. Listen to the loop." Eris stopped. She stood on the sidewalk and listened. Rain, metal, glass, scream, the bark of a dog, the murmur of voices. All of it compressed into 1.2 seconds of sound, and then silence, and then the same 1.2 seconds again. She had been hearing it since she entered the field, but she had been hearing it as noise, background, data. Now she heard it differently. She heard it the way Elias heard it, as a world, as a complete, self-contained, horrifyingly finite world. Every sound in it known, every frequency catalogued, every relationship between every element mapped and memorized and contemplated for longer than the span of recorded human history. She heard the scream, and she understood that the scream was not just Margaret Croft's scream. It was the scream of 814 people, expressed through the only voice that the loop allowed to scream. Every loop, every cycle, the collective consciousness of Briarwood poured its accumulated anguish into that single sound. In every loop, the sound was erased and started again. "Goodbye, Elias," Eris said. "There is no goodbye here," Elias said. "There is no hello, either. There is only the scream and the rain and the crash that never finishes. But I appreciate the novelty of the conversation. It was the first new thing that has happened to me in a very long time." Eris turned and walked back toward the perimeter. Behind her, the loop continued. Rain fell and unfell, glass shattered and unshattered. The car began its crash and uncrashed and began again. And in the gap between each cycle, in the immeasurable space between one repetition of forever and the next, 814 minds watched her go. She reached the boundary of the field with 90 seconds to spare on the stabilizer. When she stepped across the threshold, the silence hit her like a physical force. No loop, no scream, no rhythm, just the ordinary, chaotic, magnificent noise of a world where time moved forward, where the next second was different from the last, where rain actually hit the ground. Row 7 Alpha asked her if she was all right. She said yes. Then she sat down on the gravel shoulder of Highway 238 and did not speak for 11 minutes. The recording device was still running. It captured the sound of her breathing, the wind in the trees, the occasional crackle of a radio from the MTF vehicle. And once, very faintly, what audio analysts would later identify as a sob. The mission report filed by Dr. Eris was 47 pages long. It included a full transcript of her conversation with Elias Croft, a detailed analysis of the collective consciousness phenomenon, a revised theoretical model of SCP-5274's temporal mechanics, and a formal recommendation. The recommendation was classified at the highest level, but its essential content was included in the summary presented to the O5 Council. Dr. Eris recommended that the Foundation develop a device capable of disrupting the SCP-5274 temporal field, and that upon successful disruption, no attempt be made to alter the outcome of the events frozen within the loop. She recommended that the car crash be allowed to complete, that the rain be allowed to fall, that the scream be allowed to end. The O5 Council deliberated for 9 days. The vote was 7-6. The request was denied. The official reasoning, as documented in O5 Council Resolution 5274-1, stated that the disruption of SCP-5274 posed unacceptable risks, including the potential release of the extratemporal entities described by Subject Elias Croft, the unknown consequences of dissolving a collective consciousness comprising 814 networked minds, and the possibility that the disruption could propagate beyond the field boundary and affect the surrounding region's temporal integrity. The resolution further stated that the current containment protocols were sufficient and that no further manned expeditions into SCP-5274 were authorized, pending additional review. Eris read the resolution in her office at Site 42. She read it twice, then she locked the door, sat at her desk, and began designing a more powerful CHRONAL stabilizer. The following is an excerpt from an internal Foundation disciplinary record filed 11 months after the initial expedition. Subject: Dr. Lyra Eris, Level 3 Researcher, Temporal Anomalies Division, Site 42. Incident: unauthorized access to SCP-5274 Containment Zone. On August 3, 2024, Dr. Eris bypassed perimeter security at SCP-5274's containment zone using forged credentials and entered the temporal field equipped with a modified CHRONAL stabilizer of her own design. She remained inside the field for approximately 47 minutes before extraction by MTF Row 7. Upon recovery, Dr. Eris was found to be in a state of extreme emotional distress, but was otherwise physically unharmed. The modified stabilizer showed no signs of temporal drift or desynchronization. When asked what she had done during the 47 minutes, Eris said she had talked to Elias. When asked what they had talked about, she said everything. When asked to elaborate, she said that Elias had told her about his childhood in Briarwood, about meeting Margaret at a church picnic in 1972, about the birth of their son David, who was frozen at age 31 in the act of pouring coffee at the diner on Main Street, about the first time he went mad and the first time he came back, about the architecture of the collective consciousness and the mathematical structures it had built in the gaps between seconds, structures of pure thought that he said were more beautiful than anything in the physical world. She said Elias had also told her about the Watchers, the things in the cracks of time. He said they were closer now. He said the collective could feel them pressing against the boundary of the loop, probing it, testing it. He said the collective believed the Watchers were attracted to the anomaly the way certain deep-sea organisms are attracted to hydrothermal vents, drawn by the energy differential between frozen time and flowing time. He said the collective was afraid, which was remarkable because the collective had believed it had moved beyond fear a long time ago. He said, please. Eris was suspended from active duty for 30 days. Her security clearance was reduced to Level 2. The modified CHRONAL stabilizer was confiscated and transferred to the Foundation's Advanced Technology Division for analysis. A note in her disciplinary file indicated that she was to receive mandatory psychological counseling twice weekly for a period of no less than 6 months. During one of those counseling sessions, Dr. Eris said the following, which was recorded by her therapist with her knowledge and consent. I keep thinking about the raindrop, number 17,209, the one Elias told me about. He spent 100 years hating it and 100 years loving it, and now he feels nothing about it at all. And I think about what that means, to exhaust every possible emotional response to a single raindrop, to run through the entire spectrum of human feeling and come out the other side into something that has no name. And I think about the fact that he has done that not just with one raindrop, but with all of them. With every object, every sound, every sensation in his world. He has felt everything there is to feel about everything there is to perceive, and he has done it over and over, and he is still there, still conscious, still waiting. And we will not let the car crash happen. We will not let the scream end, because we are afraid of what might come after. But Elias is not afraid. Elias has passed through fear so many times that it has become just another landmark on a road he has walked 10,000 times. He is not asking us to save him. He is asking us to let him finish. 18 months after the initial expedition, Site Director Chen received an encrypted message through a channel that should not have existed. The message did not come from any known Foundation communication system. It did not come from any known external system. Trace analysis could not determine its origin. It appeared to have been generated from within the SCP-5274 containment zone itself, transmitted through a mechanism that the Foundation's best temporal physicists could not explain. The message contained two words: "They're here." An emergency monitoring team was dispatched to the SCP-5274 perimeter within the hour. What they observed was subsequently documented in Incident Report 5274-7, which remains one of the most heavily classified documents in the Foundation's archives. The report describes the following. At approximately 0300 hours on March 22, 2025, the visible interior of SCP-5274 began to change. The frozen scene, which had remained perfectly static for over 21 years, developed what observers described as artifacts. Small areas where the frozen image appeared to flicker, skip, or distort. The distortions were concentrated around the edges of the temporal field and progressed inward over a period of several hours. By 0600, the distortions had reached the center of town. Monitoring equipment recorded anomalous readings across multiple spectra. The temporal field's boundary, which had been stable since initial containment, began to fluctuate. The loop's duration, which had been precisely 1.2 seconds since the anomaly's creation, began to vary, first by nanoseconds, then by microseconds, then by milliseconds, and the scream changed. External audio monitoring had captured the loop's sound signature continuously for 21 years. The sound had never varied, not once, not by a single frequency. But at 0712 on March 22nd, the scream changed. It became louder, not by much, just a fraction of a decibel. But it was the first time anything inside SCP-74 had deviated from the established loop pattern. Dr. Eris, who had been reinstated to Level 3 clearance 2 months prior, was on site within the hour. She studied the monitoring data. She reviewed the audio analysis. She stood at the perimeter and looked into the town where 31,407 raindrops hung in the air, and a man she knew was trapped behind a cracked windshield, and she made a decision. She submitted Emergency Proposal 5274 Epsilon to the O5 Council. The proposal requested immediate authorization to deploy a full-scale temporal disruption device, which the Advanced Technology Division had been quietly developing based on her confiscated stabilizer designs. The proposal argued that the anomalous changes within SCP-5274 were consistent with the intrusion of extratemporal entities as described by the collective consciousness, and that allowing the loop to continue under these conditions posed a greater risk than breaking it. The O5 Council convened an emergency session. The vote was 8-5. The proposal was approved. The following account of what happened next is reconstructed from multiple sources, including external monitoring data, drone telemetry, seismographic readings, and the personal testimony of Dr. Eris, who observed from the perimeter. At 1400 hours on March 23, 2025, the Foundation deployed Temporal Disruption Device ALF-5274, a device roughly the size of a shipping container, at the boundary of SCP-5274's containment zone. The device was activated remotely from a safe distance of 500 meters. The disruption propagated inward from the field boundary at approximately 3 meters per second. Monitoring equipment recorded the loop's duration increasing steadily as the disruption wave advanced. 1.2 seconds became 1.3, then 1.4, then 1.5. The rain began to fall. Not all at once. It started at the edges, where the disruption wave hit first. Individual drops broke free from their frozen positions and completed their descent to the ground. Then more. Then more. A cascade of released rain sweeping inward toward the center of town, like a slow-motion curtain being drawn. The sounds changed too. The fragmented conversations completed themselves. Words that had been cut short 21 years ago found their endings. The dog finished its bark and looked around, confused. The bird completed its wing beat and veered upward, and at the intersection of Main and 4th, the crash completed. The sedan's engine block finished its journey into the pickup's passenger door. The shower of glass that had hung in the air for over 2 decades finally scattered across the asphalt. Metal screamed as the two vehicles reached their final resting positions. And the scream. Margaret Croft's scream. The sound that had echoed through 814 minds for longer than human history, rose to its peak, held for a fraction of a second, and stopped. The silence that followed was the most profound silence that Dr. Eris had ever experienced. It lasted for perhaps 3 seconds. And then the town of Briarwood came alive with the sound of 814 people drawing breath for the first time in what was, for them, an eternity. Emergency medical teams entered the town within minutes. Elias Croft was extracted from the green sedan with multiple fractures and internal injuries. Margaret Croft was extracted from the pickup with a broken collarbone and lacerations. Both were alive. Both were conscious. Eris was among the first responders to reach the intersection. She found Elias on a stretcher, his eyes open, looking up at a sky where rain was falling freely for the first time in 21 years. Real rain. New rain. Rain that did not know where it was going to land. He looked at her. He was crying. He was bleeding from a gash on his forehead and his breathing was labored and he was crying. "It is different," he said. He said it out loud, with his actual voice. Not in the gaps between seconds, but in the continuous flowing, beautiful messiness of real time. "What is?" Eris asked. "The rain," he said. "I do not know where the drops will land. I cannot predict them. They are new." He closed his eyes. They are all new. In the months that followed, the 814 residents of Briarwood were transported to a dedicated Foundation medical facility for treatment and evaluation. Their physical injuries were, for the most part, minor. The temporal anomaly had preserved their bodies in perfect condition. Their psychological conditions were considerably more complex. Preliminary assessments indicated that all residents retained some degree of the collective consciousness that had developed during the loop. They could still feel each other, still sense each other's thoughts, though the connection was weaker outside the field, more like an echo than a voice. Foundation neurologists documented unprecedented patterns of neural synchronization across the group, patterns that did not correspond to any known neurological condition. Elias Croft was among the most communicative of the survivors. In his initial debrief, he spoke for 14 hours without pause. He described the history of the collective, its evolution, its discoveries, its long negotiation with madness and meaning. He described the watchers in the cracks of time, and the Foundation took his description very seriously. A new task force was proposed. New containment protocols were drafted. New questions were asked about the nature of time and what lived in its empty spaces. When asked if he had any regrets about the disruption, about the crash being allowed to complete, Elias said no. He said that the crash was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. Not the pain, not the breaking, but the fact that it was happening for the first time, that it was new, that it was a second he had never lived before. Margaret, who had not spoken in centuries by her own reckoning, said one word during her initial evaluation. Finally, the SCP-5274 file remains active. The temporal field collapsed entirely following the disruption, but the area is still monitored. Researchers have detected faint residual anomalies in the local space-time fabric, tiny fluctuations, momentary stutters, as if the universe remembers what happened there and occasionally in its sleep almost does it again. Dr. Eris continues to work with the SCP-5274 survivors. She visits Elias weekly. They talk about rain, mostly, about how it sounds when it actually hits the ground, about the particular beauty of an outcome that cannot be predicted, about the difference between a moment that repeats and a moment that passes. During one of these visits, Elias said something that Eris recorded in her personal journal, though it does not appear in any official Foundation document. He said, "The worst part was not the repetition. The worst part was that we had time to understand everything about our prison except how to escape it. We knew every atom, every frequency, every relationship between every element of our world. We had perfect knowledge and zero agency. And I think that is what hell is, Dr. Eris. Not fire, not punishment, just perfect knowledge of a moment you cannot change." Eris wrote that she thought about that statement for a long time afterward. She thought about it when she reviewed the monitoring data from the Briarwood site. She thought about it when she read the reports from the new task force investigating the extratemporal entities. She thought about it when she lay awake at night and listened to the rain on her window, really listened, and appreciated every single drop for the simple, magnificent fact that it was going somewhere it had never been before. The final line of her journal entry, dated November 2nd, 2025, reads as follows. Raindrop number 17,209 hit the pavement at the intersection of Main and 4th at exactly 14 hours, 0 minutes, and 47 seconds on March 23, 2025. It landed in a small crack in the asphalt and evaporated within 11 minutes. It was, by every measure, an ordinary raindrop. But Elias says it was the most important thing in the universe for 300 years. I believe him. I believe that anything, given enough time and enough attention, can become the most important thing in the universe. And I believe that the Foundation's greatest failure would be to forget that the things we contain are not just anomalies. They are moments. And moments, no matter how small, no matter how brief, no matter how many times they repeat, contain entire worlds. End of transcript. Addendum. Classified Level 5 Eyes Only. On December 14, 2025, automated monitoring equipment at the former SCP-5274 site detected a new anomaly. A temporal field considerably smaller than the original, approximately 4 meters in diameter. It appeared at 3:17 in the morning and dissipated by 3:19. Within the field, a single raindrop hung motionless in the air for 2 minutes before falling. The raindrop was logged as Incident 5274-minor-1. There have been 14 more since then. The intervals between them are getting shorter.